The world has never been fair, and it never will be, no matter how loudly people preach morality, positivity, or equal opportunity, because beneath every polished system lies an invisible battlefield where power, perception, and psychology decide who rises and who disappears. And the first painful truth every intelligent person must accept is that honesty alone does not protect you. Effort alone does not guarantee reward, and talent alone does not secure survival, because betrayal often comes from those closest to you. Promotions often go to those who understand optics rather than competence. And recognition frequently rewards strategic positioning instead of raw ability. And while most people emotionally collapse under this realization, a smaller, more dangerous group evolves. Because dark intelligence is not born in comfort or praise but forged in humiliation, rejection, silence, and loss, and where others grow bitter or broken, these individuals grow observant, restrained, and calculating, learning to separate emotion from action, impulse from intention, and reaction from strategy. Because dark intelligence is not about cruelty or manipulation, but about awareness, foresight, and psychological discipline, the kind that watches without revealing, listens without reacting, waits without weakening, and moves only when timing guarantees leverage. And while the masses exhaust themselves arguing, explaining, defending, and seeking validation,
the strategically intelligent conserve energy, collect data, and build advantage quietly, understanding that life is not checkers, where pieces move predictably, but chess, where every move carries consequences several turns ahead. And before stepping further, it must be stated with absolute clarity that this intelligence is not a license for harm or exploitation, but armor against being used. Lead to controlled or emotionally drained, because knowledge of power does not make you evil any more than understanding fire makes you an arsonist. And the difference between a villain and a strategist is intent, restraint, and responsibility. And those who master these principles are not obsessed with domination, but with sovereignty over their own mind, reactions, and future. And this begins with the first foundational trait of dark intelligence: calculated opacity, the disciplined refusal to reveal everything you think, feel, plan, or intend. Because information is power only when it is scarce, and in a world addicted to oversharing, the individual who speaks selectively becomes magnetic, unpredictable, and influential. As people unconsciously assign greater value to words that are rare and controlled, and while most individuals respond to questions with compulsive transparency, over-explaining motivations, clarifying insecurities, exposing plans, the strategically intelligent understand that every unnecessary detail weakens leverage and invites interference, judgment, or sabotage. So instead of lying, they practice strategic silence. Instead of full disclosure, they offer fragments. Knowing that when people receive incomplete narratives, their imagination fills the gaps, often exaggerating competence, confidence known as projection bias. And this psychological vacuum grants influence without effort, echoing Machiavellian insight that appearance governs perception far more than truth. And this does not mean becoming cold or evasive, but intentional. Understanding that not every listener deserves access to your internal world, that clarity shared prematurely is often clarity weaponized against you. And as this restraint compounds, your presence gains weight, your statements command attention, and your decisions become harder to predict, which unsettles those who rely on reading others to maintain control. And flowing naturally from this is the second trait, adaptive persona. The ability to present different calibrated versions of yourself without knowing who you truly are. Because identity is not a single rigid expression, but a spectrum of traits activated by context, audience, and objective, and those who foolishly insist on being the same with everyone confuse authenticity with rigidity. While the intelligent recognize that communication is not self-expression but translation, and just as language shifts between cultures, tone, energy, and framing must shift between personalities, power structures, and environments. As analytical minds require logic, emotional minds require resonance, practical minds require utility, and visionary minds require meaning. And this adaptability is not deception, but respect for cognitive diversity, allowing connection without dilution of core values because values remain fixed even as expression changes. Like water retaining its essence while adapting its shape. And mastery of this trait makes you socially fluent, capable of navigating boardrooms, conflict, leadership, and intimacy with equal effectiveness. While those who refuse adaptation remain misunderstood, overlooked, or isolated, and yet adaptability must never erode integrity. Because without a stable core, you become hollow rather than strategic. And this balance leads directly into the third trait, psychological detachment. The liberation from emotional dependency on outcomes, approval, relationships, or external validation. Because what you are afraid to lose controls you, and what controls you can be used against you, making attachment the most common lever of manipulation. Whether it is fear of abandonment, fear of unemployment, fear of rejection, or fear of being misunderstood. And detachment does not mean indifference or apathy, but emotional sovereignty. The ability to care deeply without becoming desperate. Invested without becoming blinded. Committed without becoming trapped. Because when you are willing to walk away, negotiate without desperation, and accept uncertainty. Clarity replaces anxiety and power shifts silently in your favor. As seen in every negotiation, where the party with alternatives holds dominance, and this detachment sharpens perception, dissolves manipulation, and cultivates quiet confidence, the kind that unsettles insecure authority because it cannot be coerced. And when practiced gradually, detachment earns respect without demanding it, because people instinctively sense when someone cannot be controlled. And from this inner freedom emerges the fourth trait, silent leverage. The art of influencing outcomes without overt force, threats, or confrontation. Because true power is rarely loud and almost never rushed. And while amateurs rely on pressure, ultimatums, and visibility, the strategically intelligent rely on positioning, patience, and indispensability, creating conditions where others choose alignment voluntarily, often without realizing why. And this manifests through silence used deliberately, pauses that extract information, restraint that invites projection, alternatives that remain unspoken yet understood, and value delivered consistently without announcement, as influence compounds through reliability rather than dominance. And over time, silent leverage transforms you into a gravitational presence, someone whose absence is felt more than others' presence, and whose approval becomes valuable without being requested. And this influence matures only through patience, because silent leverage does not reward impulsivity, but consistency, long-term thinking, and emotional control, laying the foundation for deeper, psychological influence that will unfold in the next phase, where understanding human needs, fears, morality, exposure, and outcomes converges into a cohesive system of behavioral mastery, rather than manipulation, and this is only the beginning of a much larger architecture of dark. Intelligence that evolves not to control others, but to prevent being controlled. As dark intelligence matures beyond silence and positioning, it deepens into the fifth trait, psychological echo, the ability to reflect people back to themselves, so accurately that they feel seen without, realizing they are being studied, because every human being walks through life carrying invisible questions they rarely articulate. Do I matter? Am I understood? Am I valued in those who can? Answer these questions without flattery or forced gain, access to trust, influence, and emotional authority. And this is not achieved by talking more, but by listening differently. Because most people listen only long enough to prepare their response, while the strategically intelligent listen for patterns, emotional undertones, contradictions, and unmet needs, recognizing that words are rarely the truth, but clues pointing toward it. And when someone complains, they are often expressing a need for validation. When they boast, they are often compensating for insecurity. And when they criticize, they are often revealing fear. And psychological echo works by reflecting not the surface statement, but the deeper meaning behind it, making people feel understood at a level they rarely experience, which disarms defensiveness and lowers resistance. Because when someone feels seen, they stop fighting to be noticed, And this creates a powerful asymmetry where influence emerges naturally, allowing ideas to be framed in ways that resonate with the listener's internal world rather than colliding with it. And this skill becomes devastatingly effective in leadership, negotiation, persuasion, and conflict resolution. Because people rarely oppose ideas they feel align with their own identity, an ethical use of psychological echo requires genuine curiosity and restraint, because when abused, it becomes manipulation. But when practiced with integrity, it becomes a bridge between minds rather than a weapon. And as understanding deepens, the strategist encounters the most controversial yet unavoidable reality of power, ambiguous morality, the sixth trait, which acknowledges that real-world decisions rarely present clean choices between good and evil, but instead demand judgment in shades of gray, where every option carries consequences, trade-offs, and unintended outcomes. And while simplistic moral thinking seeks purity, dark intelligence seeks responsibility, understanding that intentions do not outweigh impact, and that sometimes restraint causes more harm than intervention, while sometimes mercy enables destruction. An ambiguous morality does not abandon ethics, but refines them. Shifting the question from does this make me look good too? Does this prevent greater harm or produce better outcomes? Recognizing that leadership, protection, and survival often require decisions that are misunderstood by observers who are insulated from consequences. And this trait demands a strong internal compass, because without clear boundaries, ambiguous morality devolves into rationalized selfishness. So the strategically intelligent define non-negotiable values they will never violate, while allowing tactical flexibility within those boundaries, accepting responsibility for outcomes rather than hiding behind appearances. And this capacity to act decisively without moral paralysis strengthens authority and clarity in chaotic environments, leading naturally into the seventh trait, controlled exposure, which governs how much of yourself, your plans, your capabilities, and your vulnerabilities are visible to the world. Because information once released cannot be retrieved. And in an era of constant broadcasting, those who reveal less command, more curiosity, authority, and unpredictability, as the human mind instinctively fills informational gaps with assumptions that often inflate competence, mystique, or depth, giving the restrained individual psychological advantage without deception. And controlled exposure is not secrecy for its own sake, but strategic timing, revealing strengths when they create value, withholding plans until execution prevents interference, and allowing reputation to grow through outcomes rather than announcements, especially in professional environments where early overexposure invites competition, resentment, or sabotage. And socially, it preserves depth by allowing intimacy to develop gradually rather than collapsing boundaries prematurely, reinforcing respect and desire rather than familiarity that breeds dismissal. And in digital spaces, controlled exposure becomes critical, because every post, comment, and image contributes to a permanent psychological profile that others interpret often without context. So the strategically intelligent curate presence deliberately, aligning perception with long-term goals rather than momentary validation. And this mastery of visibility feeds into the final and most decisive trait, outcome obsession, the ruthless prioritization of results over ego, appearances, arguments, and emotional comfort, because power does not belong to those who are right but to those who are effective. And while most people waste energy defending positions, proving intelligence, or seeking approval, outcome-focused individuals ask a single clarifying question in every situation. What result actually matters here? And once defined, they reverse engineer behavior, language, and strategy to achieve it, abandoning attachment to methods while remaining loyal to objectives, understanding that being correct is meaningless if nothing changes. And this mindset dissolves unnecessary conflict, Because arguments become tools rather than battlegrounds. Relationships become systems of alignment rather than arenas of dominance. And work becomes impact-driven rather than activity-driven, leading to strategic efficiency where energy is invested only where it compounds, creating the illusion of effortlessness while producing disproportionate results. An outcome obsession also fosters adaptability, because failure becomes data rather than identity, allowing rapid course correction without ego resistance, making such individuals resilient under pressure, calm amid chaos, and reliable under uncertainty, which over time builds a reputation more powerful than charisma, the reputation of someone who delivers, someone who solves, someone whose presence changes outcomes. And when these 8 traits integrate calculated opacity, adaptive persona, detachment, silent leverage, psychological echo, ambiguous morality, controlled exposure, and outcome obsession, they form not a manipulative doctrine, but a defensive architecture against exploitation, emotional hijacking, and strategic blindness, transforming intelligence from raw cognition into applied wisdom. And as this system settles into behavior rather than theory, the individual stops reacting to the world and begins navigating it, not seeking domination over others, but mastery over self, perception, and circumstance, becoming the kind of person who cannot be easily deceived, provoked, or controlled, which is the highest form of power in a world addicted to noise, impulse, and emotional reactivity. As these 8 traits fuse into a single, operating system, rather than isolated techniques, dark intelligence evolves from something you practice into something you embody, reshaping how you move through environments, assess people, and respond to pressure. Because true strategic mastery is not situational, but systemic. And once this shift occurs, you stop asking how to win specific interactions and start designing conditions where winning becomes the default outcome. Understanding that most people lose not because they are weak, but because they are predictable, emotionally transparent, and cognitively reactive, making them easy to read, easy to provoke, and easy to steer. While the strategically intelligent reverse this dynamic by cultivating internal stillness, behavioral restraint, and long-term orientation, recognizing that the fastest way to lose leverage is to reveal urgency, insecurity, or emotional investment, and thus they train themselves to slow down their responses, widen their perception, and separate stimulus from reaction, creating a psychological buffer zone where choices are made deliberately, rather than impulsively, and this buffer is what protects against psychological warfare, manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional exploitation. Because manipulators thrive on urgency and confusion, while calm clarity starves them of influence. And over time, this discipline alters how others experience you. As your reactions become harder to predict, your approval becomes harder to earn, and your presence begins to signal stability rather than volatility, which unconsciously positions you as a reference point in uncertain environments. And this reference status attracts influence without pursuit, because people naturally gravitate toward those who appear internally ordered when external systems feel chaotic. And this is where dark intelligence intersects with leadership. Not the loud, performative leadership driven by charisma, but the quiet authority rooted in consistency, competence, and emotional control. The kind that people follow not because they are inspired in the moment, but because they trust the trajectory. And this trust compounds when outcome obsession aligns with ethical restraint, creating reliability without rigidity, firmness without cruelty, and adaptability without weakness. And as this reputation solidifies, opportunities shift in quality rather than quantity, because instead of being invited into noisy competitions, you are pulled into quieter rooms where decisions are made before they become public. And this transition marks the difference between being visible and being powerful, between being busy and being effective, and between reacting to systems and shaping them. And yet with increased leverage comes increased temptation to abandon restraint, which is why elite strategic thinkers continuously audit their own motives, asking not only what can be done, but what should be done. Because power without discipline decays into arrogance, and arrogance blinds perception, making even intelligent individuals vulnerable to predictable traps, such as underestimating emotional actors, dismissing seemingly insignificant variables, or mistaking silence for agreement, and therefore sustained dominance whether in career relationships or social influence depends on maintaining humility toward complexity, curiosity toward people, and skepticism toward certainty, understanding that no strategy is permanent, no position unassailable, and no advantage immune to entropy, which is why dark intelligence emphasizes learning velocity over static knowledge, constantly updating mental models based on feedback, behavior patterns, and shifting incentives. And this learning orientation transforms setbacks into assets, because losses are reframed as information, rejection becomes filtering, and resistance becomes calibration, strengthening rather than diminishing resolve. And this psychological resilience distinguishes strategic intelligence from mere cunning, because the latter fractures under sustained pressure while the former adapts, evolves, and stabilizes. And when applied consistently, this mindset reshapes personal identity itself, as self-worth detaches from external validation and anchors instead in competence, self-trust, and internal alignment, eliminating the need to perform,
explain, or defend unnecessarily, which paradoxically increases respect, because people trust those who do not chase approval, and this trust feeds back into influence, creating a closed loop where emotional control fuels leverage. Leverage fuels opportunity, and opportunity reinforces strategic calm, forming a self-sustaining system of psychological authority that operates quietly beneath surface interactions, and while others exhaust themselves chasing status symbols, arguments, or visibility, the strategically intelligent invest in position, perception, and outcomes, understanding that real power is cumulative rather than explosive, built through hundreds of small disciplined choices rather than dramatic confrontations. And this is why dark intelligence is not about domination but durability, not about manipulation but immunity, not about controlling others but mastering oneself, in a world engineered to provoke reaction, distraction, and emotional leakage. And when fully integrated, this intelligence does not make you feared in a theatrical sense but respected in a structural sense, because people sense boundaries without them being announced, feel consequences without threats being issued, and recognize capability without it being advertised, which ultimately positions you as someone who cannot be easily ignored, undermined, or replaced, not because you demand significance, but because you consistently generate it through clarity, restraint, and results. And this state, where perception, psychology, and outcome align, is where dark intelligence fulfills its true purpose. Not to turn you into a manipulator of people, but into an architect of circumstance, someone who moves through complexity with calm precision, who cannot be easily deceived or destabilized, and who understands that the highest form of power is not influence over others, but sovereignty over one's own mind, actions, and direction. At the highest level, dark intelligence stops being something you consciously apply and becomes the invisible architecture behind how you live, decide, and move through the world. Because true long-term dominance is never built through constant confrontation, but through reputation gravity, the silent force that pulls respect, opportunity, and leverage toward you without pursuit, formed through consistency, restraint, emotional immunity, and results rather than noise or validation, as people ultimately remember who stayed calm under pressure, who delivered without excuses, and who made difficult decisions without drama. And this is where strategic intelligence matures into legacy thinking, the understanding that every interaction feeds a subconscious, psychological ledger others keep about reliability, boundaries, competence, and emotional stability. And those who rank high on this ledger are trusted with better information,
greater autonomy, and higher impact roles, while emotionally reactive individuals are quietly filtered out regardless of talent, because systems reward predictability and punish volatility. And as emotional immunity strengthens resistance to provocation, praise addiction, outrage cycles, and fear-based urgency, you stop wasting energy proving strength, and start embodying it, choosing battles based on outcomes rather than ego, declining arguments that offer no leverage, and allowing others to expose themselves through impatience while you remain composed. And over time, this composure reshapes social hierarchies around you as people instinctively adjust their tone, expectations, and behavior in your presence without you demanding anything, sensing consequence in your silence and opportunity in your approval, not because you intimidate, but because you are internally ordered and externally consistent. And this order reduces chaos in your life, not by eliminating problems, but by filtering them out before they reach you, allowing focus on high-leverage goals instead of constant damage control. This restraint becomes rare and therefore valuable, positioning you as someone who cannot be easily rushed, deceived, or controlled, which is the highest form of protection in any power dynamic. And if you integrate even a fraction of these principles, consistently calculated opacity, adaptive expression, emotional detachment, silent leverage, psychological echo, pragmatic ethics, controlled exposure, and outcome obsession, you will notice a shift not only in how others treat you but in how you experience life itself, with less anxiety, fewer regrets, and stronger alignment between intention and result. Because the ultimate goal of dark intelligence is not domination over others but sovereignty over your own mind, reactions, and direction. And once that sovereignty is established, everything else follows naturally, not because you demanded it, but because the world responds differently to those who move strategically instead of emotionally. And if this perspective reshaped how you see power, intelligence, and control, take a moment to reflect on which trait challenged you the most. Apply it deliberately in the coming days. And remember that true intelligence is not about winning every moment, but designing a trajectory that cannot be easily derailed. So stay disciplined, stay observant, stay ethical, and most importantly, stay strategically aware. Because the moment you master yourself is the moment the game stops controlling you.